B'Tselem, which also works to delegitimize Israel. And we have a group, Partners for Progressive Israel, which on their website calls for a boycott of Ahava products and SodaStream. And it's just not right to have these groups march in the Israel Day Parade. They're really trying to hijack the parade. And unfortunately, we have very weak Jewish leadership, which is allowing it to happen.
Now, when you say very weak Jewish leadership, what are you referring to?
Well, we're referring to the JCRC, the Jewish Community Relations Council, and specifically the UJA Federation of New York. They have a history of backing groups and speakers within the UJA Federation's beneficiary agencies. An example would be Roger Waters spoke at the 92nd Street Y. Well, he was invited to speak, of course, because of protests that didn't happen. Alice Walker came and she spoke. These are people who are heavily involved in the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel. As an example, they worked on a boycott of the Israel Philharmonic in Carnegie Hall. And this is a very bad thing, and we don't believe that the Jewish community should be allowing these groups to take advantage of us, advantage of the goodwill, and to come and usurp the parade, which is there to support Israel, and use it as a platform in order to delegitimize Israel.
Whose work also is it? Whether they participate?
Well, that's the UJA Federation.
They decided that they're in.
Yeah, they're the ones who have prevented the use of guidelines so that groups such that support BDS and promote BDS can take advantage and come into the parade. Yes, they are the ones. It's the UJA Federation. We have a gentleman there by the name of John Muskay, who worked on one of the first anti-Israel groups called CONAIM, Committee on New Alternatives in the Middle East. He worked with Noam Chomsky. And unfortunately, this man is the head of the UJA Federation and is giving a very big space for these groups to come and to espouse their anti-Israel agenda.
Would you have an explanation as well?
I don't know. You have to ask him, unfortunately. Yeah. Okay. I don't have an answer. I'm sorry.
Okay. Would you please tell me a little bit about your organization?
JCC Watch is an organization that works to make sure that there are no BDS organized efforts within Jewish communal organizations. So we formed in order to make sure that groups like the UJA Federation, the JCRC, Jewish Community Relations Council, the 92nd Street Y, which hosted Alice Walker and Roger Waters, and also the JCC in Manhattan, which has a long history of hosting BDS-supported groups. So we formed in order to shine a light on that, and so that the Jewish community knows that there are forces within the Jewish community that are looking to undermine Israel, and we believe that that's not something that should happen.
And coming back to the list that you provided me, the NIS, the original NIS, yeah. I read on their website they claim that they're not doing anything.
It's amazing, yes, that they claim that they do not support BDS. Unfortunately, their actions don't follow their words, because when you take a look at the book Financing the Flames by Edwin Black, and this is a gentleman that has a long history of investigative reporting, well-known, very highly respected. He wrote the book IBM and the Holocaust. And in that book, he shows that the New Israel Fund financed the international infrastructure of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement through a group called the Coalition for Women. And what we have here is a situation where the facts just don't support the rhetoric.
And how successful do you think you're going to be in trying to prevent these groups from participating this year?
Well, I don't know how successful we're going to be in preventing them, but we're certainly getting our voices heard, and we're certainly letting people know what the problem is. And I think once the people understand what the problem is, that there'll be an outcry, because there's no reason why hundreds of thousands of people that march in the Israel Day Parade should be marching with people that are looking to undermine the state of Israel. Israel is a democracy, a vibrant democracy, where all voices are heard. Arab, Christian, Jewish, they all have a vote in the Knesset. There are Arab members in the Knesset. From every creed and color, Israel is a vibrant, strong democracy. And it's a shame that we have people who are calling Israel an outlaw nation. And it's a lie, it's not a fact, it's false, and we have to stop this. And we have to stop them utilizing Jewish communal funds and Jewish communal institutions to push this horrible agenda.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
They humble Israel, and they're proud as individuals, and they're arrogant as individuals.
Just tell me a little bit about why you're here and what you're
I'm here to demand, along with others, that the Jewish Federation of New York and the JCRC not allow groups marching that promote boycotting Israeli products, Israeli services, Israeli companies. Was in an era when BDS, this boycott campaign, is gaining traction in Europe and on campuses throughout the world. This only strengthens that campaign, whose goal is Israel's destruction. And it also makes it seem as if the problem is Jews living in Judea and Samaria. That's why there's no peace. But the problem is that the Palestinian Authority does not want peace with Israel. In 2000, Prime Minister Barak, and in 2008, Prime Minister Olmert offered virtually all of the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, half of Jerusalem and statehood. They turned it down each time. They want Israel's destruction, Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority. Only last week, Mahmoud Abbas, the Prime Minister, the President of the Palestinian Authority, said to Obama, even if we get a state, we will never end our war against Israel, our campaign against Israel in the UN. He openly made it clear the goal is Israel's destruction, not Abbas. And so these people who demand boycotting Israeli products, they're missing what the issue is. This has nothing to do with the West Bank, nothing to do with Jews living in Judea and Samaria. It has everything to do with the Arabs refusing to accept Israel. They were offered statehood, the Arabs, in 1937, the Peel Commission, in 1948, the UN, in 2000, 2008, they said no every time. So we're here to demand that credibility and legitimacy should not be given to these BDS groups, that's Partners for a Progressive Israel, B'Tselem, New Israel Fund, and Peace Now, all of whom support, fund, or condone or praise boycotting Israel. And this is an outrageous mistake. They should not be legitimized and be given credibility. So we're here to say no BDS group should be allowed to march.
Yeah, but I got it corrected.
I myself have a meeting tomorrow, a private meeting, with the President of the Federation, right here in this building with John Ruskay. I'll talk to him about this. This is giving publicity and making more Jews and people who care about Israel, care about decency and truth, aware about this allowing of these terrible anti-Israel groups to march. And if it doesn't work this year, we hope next year they will have to think twice about whether to allow these groups to march. So I think it's important to expose this truth. So whether they allow them or not this year, we don't know. We're going to try. But we hope and believe that for next year, maybe things will be different.
So if they are allowed to march, do you think there'll be some action taken against them during the parade?
It's conceivable there'll be people who will boo them because they should be ostracized and humiliated, not embraced and given respect. But whether that happens or not, I don't know.
But you certainly wouldn't be inspired, or would you?
Inspiring booing them?
Yes.
I have no problem with people booing the New Israel Fund, Partners for Progressive Israel, B'Tselem, and Peace Now. I have no problem with that.
Would you be organizing the booing?
No, I'm not going to be organizing it, but I would certainly feel that that would be okay.
Thank you so much.
My name is Morton Klein. I'm the National President of the Zionist Organization of America, ZOA. Just practicing a little bit.
Groups that support the boycott of Israel to march in the Israel Day Parade. We have groups like the New Israel Fund. We have groups like B'Tselem, Partners for Progressive Israel. These groups are horrible groups working against the state of Israel, and the UJA is allowing them to give free rein and to promote themselves at the Israel Day Parade. We're very fortunate. We have a wonderful group of speakers today. We have Mort Klein, President of the Zionist Organization of America. Yay. Rabbi Al-Ghazi from Queens. We have Helen Friedman and quite a few others. We're going to start off by having a blowing of our shofars. So everyone has a shofarim. If you don't have one, represents the leader, the person who leads the pack. We are here to demonstrate that these people who are here are not leaders. They are not leaders who lead the Jewish people on the right path. who allow groups that boycott Israel and endanger its legitimacy to be a part of a celebration that should be a sincere and full support of Israel. The shofar was used to tear down the walls of Jericho, one of the strongest and most fortified cities in the land of Israel. When Joshua and Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, came into the land, they blew the shofar and the walls came down. So let us hope that also by our blowing of the shofar, the walls of separation will come down and the unity of the Jewish people will be restored in support of our wonderful and glorious state of Israel again.
Amen. Amen. I will do it, and you emulate. Now we're going to do it all together. Long Kia, 3 times, 9 times, and a long one together. Clear when others are silent.
I know.
He stands with Israel at every turn, and I'm really awaiting to hear his remarks because we're at a crucial time, both with the Conference of Presidents and with what's happening at the Israel Day Parade with the embrace of BDS groups. So ladies and gentlemen, let's give a really rousing shofar welcome to Mort Klein, President of the ZOA.
As I look at my notes while I'm addressing this really extraordinary crowd, I want all of you to know that I, Morton Klein, and my colleagues at ZOA are proud to be among really the most courageous, clearest thinking Zionists in New York City. This group right here. You have no trouble distinguishing between good and evil, right and wrong, between what is Israel loving, what is Israel bashing, what is helping Israel, what is hurting Israel. Why can't the morass of so-called Jewish leaders understand this? It's so simple, isn't it? It's so simple what's right and what's wrong when it comes to Israel. Groups that promote boycotting Israel, groups that harm Israel's reputation with lies and distortions, groups that hurt Israel economically and hurt the ability of thousands of legal law-abiding Jews and even Arabs from earning a living for their families have no business marching in a pro-Israel Day parade.
Correct.
This lends legitimacy and credibility to the cowardly and disgraceful anti-Israel actions of these groups. Instead, these groups need to be ridiculed and ostracized. We need an all-out assault on BDS groups, not a wink and a nod, and even shockingly an embrace that the UJA Federation and JCRC gives to these groups by allowing them to march. If a group boycotts Israel, the Israeli Day Parade needs to boycott them. No BDS at our parade. No BDS at our parade.
No BDS. No BDS.
No BDS at our parade. No BDS BDS in our parade. No BDS in our parade. No BDS in our parade. Let's name the names. We've got that great Jewish activist who's leading us here. Richard Allen does regularly to educate us.
No BDS in our parade.
No BDS in our parade.
No
BDS in our parade.
If the New Israel Fund gives millions to pro-Israel groups that say no to buying products from Israel, we must say no to the New Israel Fund marching in our pro-Israel Day parade. If B'Tselem promotes vicious human rights lies against Israel and calls for sanctions against Israel, we must say no to B'Tselem marching in our Israel Day parade. And finally, and an organization not mentioned, but I looked it up, I checked it out. If Americans for Peace Now, then their leaders, if they condone as they do and support saying no to buying products from Israeli companies, Jewish companies in Judea and Samaria, we must say no to Peace Now marching in our pro-Israel Day parade. No BDS in our parade.
No BDS in our parade. No BDS in our parade. No BDS in our parade.
In an era when the larger BDS movement is dedicated to Israel's destruction and is gaining ground around the world and on campuses, it is irresponsible, it is morally wrong, it is dangerous for UJA and JCRC to give legitimacy to these radical extremist groups who support these boycotts. Jewish businesses that operate in Judea and Samaria do so legally with the approval and licensing of the Israeli government.
And they feed Arabs.
I say to Mr. Ruske of UJA, I say to Mr. Miller of JCRC, your allowing these radical groups to march is wrong. We demand you cancel their invitation to march. Cancel their invitation to march. Cancel their invitation to march. Cancel their invitation to march.
Cancel the invitation to march.
And the guidelines are very simple. They should have a simple guideline.
Good supporter.
If you support, fund, promote, condone, or praise anti-Israel boycotts, you can't march in a pro-Israel Day parade. It's simple. It's not complicated. And this is a serious matter going to the heart of what it means to be a Jewish communal organization or a Jewish leader. A Jewish group or leader that gives cover and legitimacy or ignores those who defame Israel as a war criminal or seeks to harm Israel economically has no right to call himself or to be a Jewish leader. As Prime Minister Netanyahu said only last week, quote, attempts to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel, which is the most threatened democracy on earth, are simply the latest chapter in the long and dark history of anti-Semitism. These groups are aiding and abetting these horrific anti-Semitic larger groups. And I end by simply saying, Mr. Federation and Mr. JCRC, don't aid and abet the enemy of the Jewish state of Israel who promote this anti-Semitic policy of BDS. Don't allow groups with strength and support to the racist boycott policies be represented among true pro-Israel groups and schools and leaders. We must say clearly and loudly to them, as I will tomorrow when I meet with them personally, we must not allow to have BDS in our parade. No BDS in our parade, no BDS in our parade, no BDS in our parade. Thank you so very much. Thank you for being so strong and simply telling the whole truth of what is right for the Jewish people. Thank you so much.
Fort Klein, President of the DOA, Zionist Organization of America. Thank you. And this is a message specifically for the participants of the 100 Shofars rally, April 29th in New York City. He says to all of you, as coalition chairman at the Knesset in Jerusalem, I am deeply moved by the tireless supporters and marchers in the Celebrate Israel parade, and by the courageous stance of so many friends of Israel involved in the parade, calling to delegitimize those who delegitimize Israel. It is not logical or reasonable for Israel supporters to condone or overlook or indirectly cooperate with BDS groups which represent the antithesis of support for Israel. Refusing to recognize the State of Israel's sovereign right to develop and maintain an independent legal position on any issue of national importance is not legitimate. The State of Israel came into being by virtue of our people's unassailable rights, having historical, legal, and religious foundations. I am certain that by mutual effort, our just path will surmount any attempts to strike down Jewish survival and the Jewish way of life in the land of our forefathers. Amen. Signed, Member of Knesset, Yariv Levin, Coalition Chairman. And we have a message. And we have a message to the leaders of the Knesset and to every member of the 120-member Knesset. We're going to be knocking on your doors. We're going to be asking you, speak up. Speak up. Because we don't want Judaism in the United States to think that it's appropriate or proper to start pushing BDS and promoting BDS. And what we have is the UJA Federation and the JCRC, the Jewish Community Relations Council. Failed leadership. Failed leadership. Failed leadership that have given an invitation for these groups and are promoting these groups. The UJA Federation is giving money to beneficiary organizations to host people like Roger Waters, Alice Walker, major leaders in the BDS movement, using Jewish communal dollars, your charity dollars, to push BDS at the beneficiary agencies. They have no guidelines. The problem is they have no guidelines by design. They have no guidelines by design because John Ruskay and the people within the UJA Federation that are giving a space to the BDS people want them to grow. He wants them to grow. He's allowed them. Years before, these groups were never allowed to be in the parade. Never! And under John Ruskay, they're given carte blanche and are invited not only to march in the parade, but to use your charity dollars to promote them at the 92nd Street Y, at the JCC in Manhattan. It is outrageous, absolutely outrageous.
Shame.
It's shame, absolute shame. Shame, 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 shame. And I have one last message before we're going to go on to some terrific speakers. And that is that there's a promise. They're in the lobby now. We have a promise to them, to the leaders of the UJA Federation. We're going to be back. We're not going away. We're going to make sure that our Jewish charitable dollars are not misused and misappropriated for your political purposes of pushing BDS. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to Rabbi Al-Ghazi. I have to tell you that I'm moved. This rabbi has been with us from the beginning. Let me rephrase that. He was here in the beginning. He was the beginning. He spoke up, one of the first few people, all the time. Dear friends, I want to speak a little bit, not in the passionate, rousing tone of our leader and organizer, Richard Allen, to whom we owe a great deal of thanks and gratitude for inspiring us, for bringing us here, and for leading the battle as he does.
Yay, Richard! Yay, Richard!
But I want to speak a little bit with some aspects of argument. So please listen to me. I am not going to just shout or inspire. I want to talk to you. We are, as a nation, as a people that has always been held together. We have been successful in what we have done because we have been together. Of course, Jews have always been discussing and debating, unquestionably. But when it came to the State of Israel, Jews, Reform, Orthodox, and conservative, secular, atheist, and religious got together and we supported Israel with those little blue and
and white boxes that used to be here in the 30s and the 40s, when people loved Israel with a simplicity, with a whole heart. This was the people who welcomed the Israeli Day Parade. These are the people who come to the parade. The children who organized and who paid for the floats with pride and with happiness to come. You know the people who come filling the streets on that day in support of Israel. Where do we have room for people who spread lies about Israel, who tell the world that we should sanction it, that we should not buy products on that place, on this place, on the other place? Where is room for such people in our parade?
Boycott the boycott.
There's no room for those who boycott Israel. There is no room. There is no room. There is no room. You know, it's interesting that there are two arguments that people have made. One is that we should have unity. Of course we should have unity, but the unity does not mean that we are going to join our enemies. Those who don't want to support Israel are welcome to organize their own parade. But our parade, the parade of people who love Israel, has no room for those people. No room. No room. No room. One more question. And it's a question that I address to you, and you should ask the UJA. Who owns the parade?
We do.
Who owns the parade? Who is marching in the parade? Is it John Ruskay and Michael Miller and a few people who in a closed room make decisions for the rest of us?
No! No!
They want to be democratic. Why don't they conduct a poll of Jews in synagogues, in yeshivot, in Hebrew schools, and ask them, would you like to have these people who boycott Israel in the parade? They do not want to ask this question. They would prefer to make the decision among 10 or 15 people in a boardroom. That is undemocratic. That is tyrannical. That is arbitrary. That is wrong.
Bravo! Here, here.
I notice with great consternation that all of the groups that we are targeting are now saying, so one of them had the goal of saying in a group to Richard Allen, we're not marching, we're not registered in the parade, but we're going to march at the end. Why are they ashamed of saying that the UJA is allowing them to march? B'Tselem, that puts movies showing Israel at its worst, lying and showing the whole world how to sanction and condemn Israel. You know, we just now had a Secretary of State who mentioned the word apartheid. Boo, boo.
Kerry works for the UJA.
It's interesting, today the Palestinian negotiator Erekat used the same word that Kerry used, and it shows how Kerry is inciting and creating a great antagonism to the state of Israel, while saying nobody should question his honesty. We do question it. We question it, because when you do this kind of attacks against Israel, you are not entitled to be called a friend of Israel. Secretary Kerry, you're wrong, and you should apologize.
With your scripted speech to the Trilateral Commission was a misspelling. It was a printed speech.
But it's interesting that these groups that are trying to say we are not boycotting Israel, we are not doing this, and we're not doing that.
Lying.
They don't even have the courage of admitting what they're doing. Dear friends, let us make one thing clear. The parade is for friends of Israel. The parade is for friends of Israel. The parade is for friends of Israel. And for those who have questions, there is no room. No room. No Israel. The Jewish people has always been blessed when we come together in unity. And that is, you know, the unity of the Jewish people is what we are trying to create in the parade. And those people who are introducing these divisive groups, They are the ones who are ruining the parade. They are raining on our parade. Thank you.
Rabbi Agazi, thank you very much. Rabbi, it was terrific to hear those great words. Terrific. Ladies and gentlemen, we have another very special speaker. I have to tell you that this is a woman that I admire very, very much. She has dedicated her life. She's working hard for the Jewish people, telling the truth, deceit, misadvise, give false information. She's out there, speaking the truth, standing up for the Jewish people, standing up for the land of Israel. The President of Americans for a Safe Israel, Helen Friedman, please come up.
Thank you all for being here. You are our army. You are a grassroots army, and we are so grateful that you're here. I know that the numbers would be double, triple if it weren't for this bad weather, but it doesn't matter. No one's going to rain on this parade. We're here to say what we have to say. You know, Richie and Rabbi Agazi and Mort Klein all spoke to you about the fact that we are being betrayed by the UJA, the Federation, the JCRC, the people who are supposed to be supporting us, the people who we supported years ago. We thought these were our spokespeople, and they have terribly disappointed us because of the failed leadership in those organizations. But I want to talk to you about something a little different right now. I want to talk to you about why things like BDS can happen. Why someone like John Kerry, Secretary of State, under the control of President Obama, why he has the effrontery, the nerve, the daring to think about Israel as an apartheid state, unless it hangs itself in a contract with terrorists like Fatah and Hamas. How dare he suggest that Israel do that? How dare he suggest that if Israel doesn't do it, it will open itself up to numerous terrorist attacks? He's in effect giving a green light to all our enemies. Why does such a thing even happen? We have to ask ourselves these questions. I think the root of the problem, folks, is that we do not assert our identity as the people who inherited the land of Israel in the Bible. This is our entitlement. Right. And from this entitlement sprung the legal entitlements, the historic entitlements, all the others. But the roots are the Bible. If we had not given over Judea, Samaria, and the Jordan Valley to military control, it's under military control. The army can go in and destroy homes in Judea and Samaria. The army can threaten Od Yosef Chai Yeshiva in Yitzhar. It can do all those things because there is no application of sovereignty in those areas.
Annexation.
If we said that we must have sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, that this is our homeland, that Judea, Samaria, all of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, how can we think about dividing Jerusalem? How can there be talk about such a thing? Those of you who've stood under the wedding canopy, you smashed the glass. You smashed the glass. Do you know why you smashed the glass? It was because your heart was breaking at the time of your joy. The joy of your wedding, your heart is breaking because of Jerusalem having been destroyed. Because 2 temples were destroyed. And now on Har HaBayit, the holiest place in Israel, we are not sovereign. My organization, Americans for a Safe Israel, we go there, we're going next week, on Yom Ha'atzmaut, the day when we celebrate Israel's birthday. 66 years. 66 years. We're celebrating Israel's birthday, and we're going to try to go up to Har HaBayit. I say we're going to try, because we could have stones thrown at us. We could have the Israeli police say, I'm sorry, there's no place for you. All these things happen to Jews when they go to the holiest place. So we are losing our control of everything. And that's why the BDS people are successful. That's why they can say we're boycotting. I'm just reading a statement from UJA. They're not global boycotters. They only boycott the things from Judea and Samaria. Well, that's ridiculous. We don't accept boycott. We accept a beautiful, a desirable, a sovereign Israel. That's our BDS. Beautiful, desirable, sovereign. No boycott, divestment, and sanctions.
No BDS.
I want us to leave here saying, Ani Ma'amin. I believe. Ani Ma'amin. Believe Shalema with a whole heart that this Israel is ours. We're not giving it away to the people who run these phony organizations. We're not giving it away to those who lie to us. We're not going to allow an administration that says we have your back, but actually there's a knife in his hand. We're not going to allow that to happen. So we leave here strengthened. Ani Ma'amin. Thank you all for coming. Keep working.
For boycott to be allowed to march in the Israel Day Parade. And the fact of the matter is that the leader of this organization, the UJA Federation, John Muskay, worked with Noam Chomsky. Worked with Noam Chomsky in one of the first anti-Israel groups called CONAME, Committee on New Alternatives in the Middle East. He didn't just work there a little bit. He was instrumental. And you know what they called for? They called for a halt of all military equipment to the state of Israel. I am asking you, what does that mean? What does that mean when the leader of the UJA Federation called for a halt to all military sales to the state of Israel? It means he wants to see Israel destroyed. How could anyone call for a halt of military equipment to our beloved state of Israel? How? And be the leader of a Jewish organization?
Out. Out.
This is the worst thing in the world. So when you ask, how did this happen? How did groups that boycott Israel get a space and were given growth and were given food and oxygen? It's because of John Muskay and his gangster group within the UJA Federation. A group that is using Jewish communal charity dollars to push a political agenda. And until these people stop, until we get the UJA to stop, this is going to continue to happen. Where we're going to have groups that go against the state of Israel. Where we have the state of Israel in the Knesset, the leader of the coalition, MK11, saying what the UJA Federation is doing is wrong, inviting groups that support the boycott of Israel. You read the letter. You saw what he said. We hope that our shofars today are going to have opened their hearts so that we will be able to get a resolution to this. Lori, Lori Reagan. Lori, can you come up, please?
In this weather, and as everybody said, no one is raining on our parade, notwithstanding. It's my honor to be here to represent the Endowment for Middle East Truth. I'm going to begin by referring to a comment by a rabbi recently. When he heard about our protest, he claimed, well, most of the groups sponsoring this protest are right-wing. And then he proudly said, and I support NIF and B'Tselem. Because just because you're critical of Israel doesn't mean that you're anti-Israel. So, I just want to begin with the labeling of the groups involved in this protest as right-wing. While Emmett is a nonpartisan think tank, I have to say I am a proud Republican Jewish woman, and I'm sick and tired of hearing people call that an oxymoron. Because when it comes to Israel's staunchest supporters, they hail from the Republican Party and not the party that boos God and Jerusalem. More importantly, as long as the rabbi raised it, let's talk about what it means to be pro-Israel. Because this Big Tent nonsense is growing quickly out of control. What does it say about a people who align themselves with political organizations that at best feign support for Israel, but in reality take measures that could quite possibly harm the country's long-term survival? I had a column published yesterday. I write on the side as well, and I titled it, "The Three Little Kosher Pigs, Can a Big Tent Survive?" It touches on this very issue, so I want to spend a moment just talking about the fable of the three little pigs and how they relate to the Jewish people. We can think about the pigs as the Jewish people and the numerous anti-Semites over the millennia that have tried to destroy them. Many centuries ago, Jews built houses made of straw that were easily blown away during the Roman Empire, the Spanish Inquisition, and on and on. And by the time that the Jews settled in Europe in the 20th century, Jews felt safe enough to build houses made of wood instead of straw. They were not fearing the wolves in sheep's clothing as they integrated into society. And as we observed Yom HaShoah, we know how things for those Jews worked out. In my version of the Three Little Pigs, there's actually two brothers that separate. One moves to Israel, builds houses of bricks, surrounds them with walls of cement and missile defense systems, and it's thriving. The other pig moved to the United States, where it not so brilliantly decided to build what UJA federations and other mainstream Jewish organizations like to call a big tent as its home. Like the Jews we just revisited during Passover, who while waiting for Moses to descend Mount Sinai began building false idols, the leaders of UJA federations, JCRC, and the like are also worshiping false idols. For some, these idols are simply progressive values that take priority over Israel. For others, it's their egos, narcissism, and access that rule their decisions as they proudly boast of an open tent. But American Jews better be careful, because when that big empty tent is blown down by the forces of anti-Semitism, BDS, and Obama's anti-Israel policies that we've been living with for 6 years now, the impact will be felt most strongly in Israel. In my view, the most dangerous wolves are not the obvious anti-Semites, of which there are many. They are the wolves in sheep's clothing, including those who work in this very building. Tomorrow, the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations is voting on admitting J Street into the conference. Rabbi Eric Yoffe, certainly a wolf in sheep's clothing, took to the pages of Haaretz to proclaim that the conference should, quote, ignore the Jewish rights, here we go again with the partisan labeling, tiresome orgy of hostile invective against J Street, and claiming that the future of the organized American Jewish community is at stake. Well, I don't disagree. The future of the organized Jewish community in America is at stake, and we need to win this battle. But perhaps even worse, the Uniform for Reform Judaism, the Anti-Defamation League, the Conservative Movement's Rabbinical Assembly, and the Jewish Council for Public Affairs have all come out in support of J Street's bid, claiming, as JCPA's president did, quote, they're an important part of the Jewish community. They fit in the picture of a big tent, which is the kind of community we believe in strongly, end quote. And rumor has it, in an article today, that JFNA will also vote in support of J Street's inclusion. Make no mistake, J Street is not a pro-Israel Jewish organization, and the disingenuous nature of its claims that it supports Israel are laid to bear when it announces supporting negotiations with the terrorist group Hamas and defends John Kerry when he talks about Israel being an apartheid state. Boo! J Street should not be marching in the Salute to Israel Day parade any more than an NIF or B'Tselem should be. But that brings me back to the decision of the UJA and JCRC, who are so lost in their big tent as they double down on the decision to include pro-BDS and dangerous organizations in the parade, that one has to wonder what in the world Hashem is thinking as he looks down on his people repeating the mistakes of their ancestors over and over again. If homes of straw and sticks could not withstand the forces of wolves tearing them apart, how in the world will a big tent protect the Jewish people from the wolves foaming at the mouth, pacing around them? And I repeat, the decisions of the Jews in the diaspora to open their big tent to their enemies may have horrific consequences on their brethren living in Israel. For when the wolves blow that tent down, all the huffing and puffing will be felt the world over, and there may not be another pig's house left to run to. UJA and JCRC may not think their decision will have any impact on the long-term survival of the Jewish people or the national security of the State of Israel, but they are simply wrong. Giving voice and credibility to anti-Israel organizations, especially on top of an American administration whose policies and actions are taking a dangerous toll on Israel already as it isolates and demonizes the Jewish homeland, is a horrific mistake of enormous magnitude. The more credibility our own people give to supporters of BDS, the more dangerous we become to ourselves and to Israel. Which brings me full circle back to the question I raised earlier. What does it mean to be pro-Israel? Mitchell Board of the American Israel Cooperative Enterprise wrote a column suggesting that we forget about the Big Tent analogy, and he went on to list 13 criteria. I'm not going to take the time to list all 13. However, he included one obvious item. Someone who is pro-Israel does not join forces with Israel's enemies, including by advocating boycotts of Israel. It is clear that NIF and B'Tselem are not pro-Israel, but UJA and JCRC are treading in dangerous territory when they join forces with these enemies of Israel. Their pro-Israel bona fides are open to question due to their own blind, shallow, progressive, and dangerous policy of opening their tent to these organizations. They should be ashamed of themselves, and every one of their donors who continues to support them are abetting in the possibility that history will soon repeat itself, with Jews being complicit in their own demise. As we observe Yom HaShoah, perhaps some personal introspection should occur on the part of these people, the people in this building, making these god-awful decisions. Because liberal Jews who are either silent or support groups that take to the streets in support of harming Israel, which is what BDS does, based on a Big Tent philosophy, are wolves in our midst and should be shown the door so that brick houses can be erected. If we do not learn the lessons of history, we are doomed to repeat them. Thank you all.
A very, very important group in Israel called Matodarim. What they do is they keep tabs of all the Knesset members and how they vote, and then they put out a report card. And then everybody, when it comes election time, they look at this report card and they look and they really see which Knesset member was for, helped the land of Israel, Judea and Samaria, and who talked and didn't really do very much. So we want to thank Matodarim for, Susie Dim, who's the director, who's phenomenal, they were instrumental. They have strong connections with the Knesset, and they were the ones that connected with Yariv Levin. He's the chairman of the coalition of the Likud and got the letter. Yeah, so Yasher Koach to them.
Thank you very much. Now, out of respect for the UJA, maybe I would have shaved in general for this rally. But now, some of us here, of course, haven't shaven. Why? Because it's the Omer, the mourning period for the Jewish people. Why? Why? Because 24,000 wise, students, Talmidei Chachamim, died. How could that be? We all know because they did not honor each other. They did not honor each other. They spoke Lashon Hara against each other. Now, we're not here to speak Lashon Hara against the UJA because, after all, the UJA does do a lot of good things. Okay? But we also know from the rabbis, the Rabbanan, that if you hear, a person hears of a shidduch, a match that is being made between a young man and a young woman, and you know that there is something wrong with that match, it is incumbent upon you to notify that party whose child will be getting into something that they don't know about. And if it's a bad shidduch, you have to notify them. Well, we are here now to notify John Risque how risque it is to be involved with such a match between the Celebrate Israel Parade and these three and other groups in J Street. This is not a good shidduch. This is a destructive shidduch. And it is not Lashon Hara for us to be here to say this, because it is incumbent upon each one of us to point that out to him. And I congratulate everyone who came out in this weather in order to let them know that. Am Yisrael Chai.
The name of our group in America is called the Jewish Leadership Movement, Manhigut Yehudi. A few years ago, we tried to get into the parade. They didn't really let us in. They put all kinds of hurdles in front of our way because we have the quaint notion that the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. Oh my God, this is crazy, right? But if you want to boycott Israel, sure, you're in. No problem. Right, Paul?
Exactly.
Thanks, Paul. So, you know, everybody, this is a rally. I think everybody's a bit quiet. Right? Is everybody quiet here? No. What kind of state is Israel? Now, when I say 2468, you're going to tell me what kind of state Israel is. Israel is a Jewish state. 2468. Israel is a Jewish state. 3579. No such thing as Palestine. Bingo. One more time. 2468. Israel is a Jewish state. 3579.
No such thing called Palestine.
Okay, you guys are good. Okay. You know, the stragglers are always the hardcore right-wingers, right? So, you know, picking up on what Helen said, Helen talked about what the Israeli government's doing in Judea and Samaria. Well, it all goes back to, on the Temple Mount, Helen got arrested for praying. A Jew can't go on the Temple Mount and pray without getting arrested. So in essence, the state of Israel has declared that we are the occupiers. So that the BDS people have a little bit of logic. We need to fix the government of Israel so they stand up and be proud and Jewish and make the state run according to Jewish values and not these values where we want to fit in, we want to be a nation like the other nations. And that's what Bibi Netanyahu's book is called, Israel, a place among the nations. Moshe Feiglin's book would be called Israel, a light unto the nations. There's a big difference. These 2 points of view cannot be settled together. It's either one or the other. And when we're trying to fit in with the rest of the nations, we're fading away. The boycotters are in our parade, and the people who are proud Jews can't be. So there's a big problem. So thank you very much to Richard and to Rabbi Al-Ghazi for organizing this parade, and to everybody for coming out. And I think one more time. 2468.
Israel is a Jewish state.
3579.
No such thing called Palestine.
Major press release. I got sent a copy. He's very worried.
Yay!
He is very worried.
Should be worried.
He says there's 100 people blowing shofars in New York. Have it right here. And he says it's very dangerous. He says, why should I worry when the heads of the UJA Federation and the JCRC support us? That's what he says in his email, in his notice, in his press release. He says that. Why should I worry? Well, the answer is he should worry. Because when the heads of the UJA Federation and JCRC have someone who works to destroy Israel, like the New Israel Fund, saying that they support him, we know we're in trouble. We have work to do. We have poor leadership. I want everyone here to take a pledge to themselves that you'll go back to all your communities, talk to your friends, educate them, let them know what's going on, raise your voices. This is not the end. This is only the beginning. God bless you. Thank you very much.
Say, first of all, again, thank you to Richard Allen for organizing this wonderful, wonderful rally and this wonderful campaign. Thank you to all of you, each of you, who under umbrellas and with heavy coats are here because you defend Israel, you love Israel, and our love will continue to overpower the darkness that comes from the wrong people. I want to end with one thought. Tonight is going to be Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh represents the time when we see the new moon. The Jewish people have been compared to a moon for one reason. Sometimes the moon appears to be gone and there's no more light. And people were afraid that it will never come back. But the moon always reappears. So are the Jewish people. Sometimes we begin to come in small people and small groups, and we seem to be overpowered by the forces of evil and falsehood and wrong, and we begin to be worried that perhaps we will disappear. But the moon will appear again. It will come with a strong light, and it will overpower the power of darkness. Chodesh Tov.